ExReligious people, what caused you to lose faith? Nothing made me lose faith in an instant. It was a slow process of one realization after another, one fallacy after another, one absurdity after another. These are all based on my experience and perspective, of course. I eventually could not hold on any longer and had to let it go. Then life started to become fuller, more enjoyable, and enlightening. I felt freer and more capable of making a positive impact on the world around me. I would say that I most closely resemble a humanist now in my beliefs and lifestyle. My dad died in a car crash. It was almost 3 years ago. We don't know how it happened. It was a single vehicle accident. He might have fallen asleep or been distracted, but maybe he did it on purpose. I went to confession and asked the priest about it, and I just wanted to be comforted, but he said that if he did it on purpose, depending on his state of mind, it might have been a mortal sin. So he thought my dad might be in hell. It made me cry so hard I puked. That's what made me start to lose my religion. Common sense, I guess. I was raised Protestant in a very conservative household. As I got older, I learned to examine things scientifically and ask basic, common-sense questions, and all I ever got in return were silly platitudes and vague generic answers like, well, that's what faith is, believing in something without any evidence. Eventually, I dismissed most religion as a waste of time. It makes sense from a logical standpoint for our ancient ancestors to rationalize extreme events or concoct elaborate stories to explain their existence, and that is really the only angle that I find interesting when studying religion, but the actual core beliefs of most religions are fairly silly to me now and make little sense. I often find myself wondering privately how people can believe a lot of those stories. I accidentally stumbled upon, and then was peer pressured into joining a cult. A week later, I did some research on them and realized they were a cult. I haven't been back, but that was last week. That was 100% serious. It's not a religious cult, more of a new age philosophy / self-help kind of thing, but what really made me lose faith in them, aside from just the obvious logical fallacies, is I began to realize how their emphasis on social involvement and bombarding people with love and positivity was just their way to manipulate others into doing whatever said cult says is the correct thing to do. That said, I can see how angry / unhappy people like myself would benefit from involving themselves in a social group made up of almost across-the-board super nice, caring, empathetic people. It's almost like practice in being positive. The reason I joined them in the first place is I always felt great around them and thought they must be onto something. I read the Left Behind series, which led me to reading the New Testament. I loved the philosophy in the New Testament and started to become a really religious kid for a year or so. Then I read the Old Testament and got really confused when I kept disagreeing with a lot of what was written. I asked myself, why would God have let his holy book have something like this written in it? I started to look at my beliefs in a critical light and decided that I didn't believe a word of it. That led me to the internet and popular atheists like Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss. I went through the stereotypical angry atheist phase, but when I grew up some more, I started to think more rationally about the whole thing. I still have a lot of respect for certain aspects of religions, but I try to avoid the whole thing now. Was in 5th grade, sitting in church, bored, thinking about why the heck my parents lied about Santa. Wonder what else they lied about. Hey, what if, no, that's too big of a deal, they wouldn't. All the adults take it way too seriously. But, what if? There's the thing where I look at something from a different perspective. Whoa, this would be so stupid if God didn't actually exist, haha. But I know he's real because carrot, because happy face carrot, because fuck, I couldn't switch my perspective back, even though I did try, but after a while, I got older and could think about it more rationally and came to the conclusion that he really wasn't real, so I didn't need to keep trying to convince myself. I was never that religious as a kid, but had a basic belief just because my family did and everyone I knew did. I was mostly indifferent to religion and had a don't know, don't care attitude through high school. I didn't really think about it until I went to college and actually encountered atheists and other non-believers that I started to think about it and realized that it didn't add up to me. I never had it to begin with. I was raised up Catholic in an Irish-American household. I read the Bible early and spent my teenage years doubting because it was so absurd. I spent years studying religious texts looking for some tangible evidence of a God, but found only the apologist explanations why God does nothing. When I was 19, I knew more theology than most priests. When I moved out of my folks' house, I stopped going to church. I openly identified with the atheist movement for a long time until I saw how most were acting like the assholes we poke fun of in the religious community. Right now, I still don't believe in any deities, but it would be cool if the Norse pantheon was real. Odin rocks. Lack of evidence outside of the Bible, which was written after Jesus supposedly lived. Just a lot of things started not making sense. For example, why did God even bother with the whole Adam and Eve and the fruit tree thing when he knew what was going to happen anyway? Just little things like that. Noah's Ark. It just seemed the most patently absurd story in the Bible. Everything about it, the timing of when it's supposed to have happened, the supposed size of the boat, the fact that every single animal is supposed to be on it, the explanation of where rainbows come from, all of it just defies any sort of logic. Like, even more than all the other stuff in the Bible. I realized that it was essentially the equivalent of all those how the animal got its features stories. It's just a myth to explain something that people didn't understand, that got passed down verbally and warped over the course of generations. Once I accepted that I had to accept the Bible wasn't infallible, what I had been raised to believe, and from there it was just like dominoes with one belief after another coming down. I lost religion, but I didn't necessarily lose faith, if that makes any sense. I guess the appropriate term would be deist, rejecting the trappings of established faith, but still accepting the notion of a higher power or powers. It didn't happen all at once, of course. It was a steady erosion caused by a never-ending series of events. Acts of hypocrisy, self-contradiction, the perpetual us versus them mentality, that kind of thing. If you watch Bill Burr's skit about his walking away from religion, that's exactly how I felt and what I did. The illogical and irrational ways of thinking felt normal, until I realized that I was basically brainwashed at a young age. Once I stepped back and looked at everything objectively, it made very little sense to me anymore. I used to be a passive Christian, then a friend of mine passed away. An acquaintance posted on his Facebook wall about how he was sad that he didn't live a good life and was going to hell. That started it. Eventually, I started to realize that relationship with God, or whatever you call it, is a personal thing. All I know is that I am here, other people are here, and this world is all we have. So I just respect myself, respect others, and respect my environment. I meditate as a form of prayer, and it is mostly to find peace with the universe, which I see as the best way to get close to whatever being, if there is one, created all this. I was heavily indoctrinated in an evangelical church. However, the other kids bullied me a lot, and I realized even if God was real, that church was full of petty little people just like the rest of life. Then, over time, I started getting into arguments with my pastor and my small group leader because they didn't have any strong biblical education and often said non-canonical things that no one ever called them on, such as referencing the second or third English meaning of a word that was translated from Latin. By the time I got to HS, I studied evolution and realized that church was more than anything a social/community organization, and religion was a dime a dozen. Now I spend my time on hobbies I care about. I was raised in a religious family. It never really made sense to me, and I slowly drifted away from it. The last straw was hearing someone point out that the only difference between a cult and a religion is popularity. Based on my own beliefs and biases, which were shaped by society. Cults are weird and full of crazy people, religions are normal and full of decent people even if you don't totally agree with them. However, I realized that I could find no logical basis to differentiate between the two or to place any given belief system in one category or the other. If I can't say for sure what is crazy and what is not, how can any of it make sense? I concluded that I would never be certain about what the truth is, and made peace with that. Our car broke down on the freeway with my mom driving and me and my brother in the car. It was around 6, rush hour, and we all could have been killed. I remember hearing my mom talking to a friend who helped us out, while there really must have been someone looking after us, so we didn't get hit. Her friend replied, "Well, if there was someone looking after you, why did you let your car break down?" That is what ultimately made me lose my faith. I was only 9 years old. Remember the Prius episode of South Park where the smug bastards all got high off of the smell of their own farts? Remember in high school where everyone was super clique-y and you didn't really speak to anyone until another person brought you into their group? Combine those two scenarios. That's pretty much been my experience at every church I've been to. I'm sure Jigus is proud. It was a process for me. I was raised Catholic, and I honestly feel like the church I was raised in doesn't exist anymore. I'm grateful for the time I had as a Catholic, and that has been my foundation for social justice. But I didn't feel like I could be morally okay with staying in a religion where child abuse is covered up, where women don't get equal roles, and where you can be told to not take communion if you were gay or divorced. I just couldn't do it anymore. The last time I was in a church was for my grandfather's funeral. I don't see myself ever going in one again. I actually attended Catholicism classes and was an altar boy for the church every week. I started to see a lot of contradictions and ridiculousness unraveling whenever I asked the priest questions in class. I soon learned that it wasn't really an environment that was friendly to people that were inquisitive about the Bible. Everywhere else, I was encouraged to seek knowledge and ask questions in order to learn new things, but I was shot down constantly in church. Many of the teachings/stories just didn't hold up to scrutiny. And it wasn't like the priest didn't know what he was doing either. He was a super smart guy, fluent in 4 languages, and had a few theology degrees from universities domestic and abroad. He just couldn't stand me questioning his faith. I came to the conclusion that a lot about religious faith is truly just that, blind faith. Proof isn't required. I couldn't stand it, so I just quit. I don't think I was ever that religious to begin with. Religion was just a part of my life because I went to a Catholic school and went to church once a week. It was never a part of my life at home. Eventually, when I was in high school, I started to realize that religion was only in my life because of external institutions like the church and school. When my uncle became sick, I prayed every day that he would get better, but unfortunately, he passed away. However, it wasn't that I prayed and prayed, but he didn't get better that made me lose faith. It was more so the realization that my family was more of a support system in that situation that religion could have ever been. I decided then that I wasn't going to associate with being Catholic or religion anymore. I feel a lot more free. I'm the child of 2 ministers. I left my faith 5 years ago. Shortly before I quit faith, I decided it was time to get serious about my faith and stop being so inconsistent. So I sat down to study. I thought it would be a good idea to learn about other faiths so that I could minister to folks from other backgrounds, learn more about my faith through what it wasn't, and avoid being a dick to others. At the end of the day, the similarities I noticed really shook my understanding of my faith as absolute truth. From there, I slowly drifted away because there's just no way to verify my former faith's claims and invalidate the claims of other faiths. I began to feel inauthentic professing something I couldn't evidence. And one day, I just said this is not who I am anymore. At first, the stuff my teachers and pastors said didn't make sense, and when I questioned them, I got into trouble for it, or I was told I was disturbing the peace and sent out the classroom. When I asked other kids about it, they said they believed in God because they didn't want to go to hell. To me, that was the real WTF moment. I didn't need anyone telling me that in order to get to heaven, I needed to be a good person or follow a bunch of kind of stupid rules that didn't make sense. At the time I was in 6th grade, people dismissed my questions and disbelief as me buying a teenager or me trying to be edgy. Anyway, I just really want to be an all-around good person and really just make an impact on people's lives, even the smallest thing, as long as they are happier than when they met me, and I really don't need some bearded wizard that lives in the sky to tell me that. When I was 17, my mom and I were checking out a local community college. I saw someone's t-shirt that had the no symbol over the word God. We felt offended, but it got me thinking. I eventually went online and looked at the opposing side. I researched what I didn't want to know, and I've been agnostic since. Critical thinking. In all seriousness, I read the Bible, and the more I read it, the less I wanted to believe in God. And the more I thought about it, the less sense everything made. Finally, I just decided that whether there was a God or not, I wasn't going to practice any religion. And over time, I guess I just stopped believing in any kind of higher power. I was never a super religious, but I was raised Catholic, went to Catholic grade in high school, and I did believe. When I was 20, my very religious aunt died of cancer that had gone into res mission and come back several times, leaving behind 4 kids ages 8-ish to 16-ish. At her wake, they had her diary out while she was going through everything, and I randomly opened to a page that said something along the lines of, God, I know and accept that you do everything for a reason, but why me? For weeks, I just could shake, why would a God that loves us do that to someone who loved God unconditionally to put her and her family through all this? And then just one day it clicked because God isn't real. 14 years later, and there has never been a moment where I've doubted my lack of faith. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.